Hey all, Rick here from Hamilton Sports Central, and we are doing our fantasy news for week 6 as we have the top plays in the CFL Fantasy for every position. 3 stories to watch, fantasy starts and stops, and we are going to take an early look at the most Canadian. We have the most outstanding Canadian watch top 6 contenders in week 6. So let's start with the top plays in the CFL Fantasy for every position for week 6. So quarterbacks, we have Nathan Rourke, BC, 14,200 salary, projected 20.8 fantasy points. When Nathan Rourke is healthy, it's almost impossible to rank any other pivot above him. The scary part is we have yet to see his best. Number 2, Bo Levi Mitchell, Hamilton, 15,000. Projected points, 18.7 points, or projected fantasy points. Now that's the Bo we were waiting for. Topped the last week at 33.4 fantasy points is a tall ask. But if Mitchell faces an Ottawa pass defense which has allowed 12 completions of better than 30 yards, the aerial show will commence just after 7 p.m. Eastern on Saturday. Trey Ford, Edmonton, 14,000 salary, 15.4 projected fantasy points. Trey Ford averaged 12.5 yards per pass in the win over Ottawa, his best total of the season. The Elks haven't sorted out the receiving room yet, but Ford's progression continues to make him a solid fantasy option. And then we have Vernon Adams, Calgary, 14.8 salary, 14.8 projected fantasy points. Among pivots with at least 16 attempts or more than 25 yards in depth, Vernon Adams' 52.4% rate tops them all. Saskatchewan has done a good job keeping deep strikes in check, yet we can count on Vernon Adams Jr. to challenge the Riders frequently on Friday night. So in other words, they're saying not to play Harris by the looks of it, and no Drew Brown, only top 4. Running backs, Dedrick Mills, Calgary, 14,000. I wouldn't say adding a running back whose average run of 10 plus yards every carry and leads the league in majors helps my lineup, said no one ever. AJ Ouellette, Saskatchewan, 13.5. Dedrick Mills versus AJ Ouellette is undercard for Friday's battle for West Division supremacy. Yes, your lineup will need a value pick or two, but if you can fit both of them in your Week 6 lineup, here's one vote telling you to go for it. You have the Elks, James Butler, BC, 11.400. 14.1 projected fantasy points. The Elks are last against the pass. We mentioned this because James Butler leads all running backs with 21 targets, coming off the performance that saw him score only 7 fantasy points in week 5. We also remind you that Butler typically follows up a bad showing with a gem. Justin Rankin, Edmonton, 10,000. Justin Rankin will continue to receive a heavy workload while the Elks continue to figure out their receiving corps. His salary makes him a good choice if the top 3 backs are too pricey for your Week 6 desires. Slow. Kenny Lawler, Hamilton. Now this is receivers. Kenny Lawler, Hamilton, 36,600, 22.3 projected fantasy points. In case you need a reminder of what Kenny Lawler did last week, and it's a YouTube video. Keon Hatcher Sr., BC, 11,500. 13.8 projected fantasy points. The catch rate here, 48.8%, is daunting, but production will remain elite despite last week's 8.8 fantasy point letdown. Justin McInnes, BC, 12,500, 13.2 projected fantasy points. Having Rourke back in the lineup means Justin McInnes returns among the fantasy elite. Last week's 16.9 feels like a springboard towards a stretch of monster production. Eugene Lewis, 11,000, 13.1. Eugene Lewis scored at least 10.6 in all but one game this year. Best is yet to come now that Drew Brown is back firing at will. Last week's 21.5 fantasy points is a clear sign that a new streak of scoring majors might be at hand. Keyshawn Johnson, Saskatchewan, 10,000, 13.6 projected fantasy points. Calgary's pass defense has been miserable for opposite pivots. If you need to start a rider this week, Keyshawn Johnson's the easiest call. Stanley Berryhill III, BC, 9,800 salary, 13.3 projected fantasy points. The Lions' passing game is that good. Having 3 receivers ranked in the top 6 is more than justified. Number 7, Jalen Philpott, Calgary, 8.3 for salary, 8.4 for projected fantasy points. Jalen Philpott is quietly averaging 18.7 yards per catch. His 52.2% catch rate has room for improvement, but we're better that it rises as his average number of targets per game climbs with Reggie Bangleton and Clark Barnes sideline. Justin Hardy, number 8, Ottawa, 9.1 thousand salary, 11.1 projected fantasy points. This is probably the last week Justin Hardy is ranked this low. A huge stretch of elite production is looming. Start him. Tim White, 11,400, 12.4 projected fantasy points. Tim White missed the fun of Mitchell's breakout party last week, finishing with 5 fantasy points. The 9.4 depth yards per route will not stay that low for long. Number 10, Stephen Dunbar, Edmonton, 9,500, 10.2 projected fantasy points. He's had 3 straight games of double-digit production as the only consistent receiving option the Elks have. Pairing with Dunbar Jr. with Ford is low-key money play. Defenses. Calgary, 8,100, 8.8 projected fantasy points. The Stamps won't have to repeat last year's 12 fantasy point performance. However, they are a solid option going against the Riders' offense, ranked last in passing yards per game. Saskatchewan, 9,000, 7.9 projected fantasy points. 2 games of at least 10 fantasy points despite their troubles with the pass. Riders have yet to hit their stride, and their corpse of playmakers could make life miserable for Stamps' offense. BC, 6,000, 3.3 projected fantasy points. A dart to throw of sorts. The Lions have steadily unspectacular for fantasy users. They'll need to improve their knack for creating turnover 6 against the Elks team with a -3 turnover margin. So that's it for the top players per position. The 3 top stories this week. Battle of the best in the West. Calgary at Saskatchewan, Friday, July 11th, 9 p.m. Eastern, TSN, RDS, and CFL Plus. If you're looking for a game that features 2 eventually matched teams that are on top of their division, Friday night game between Saskatchewan Roughriders and Calgary Stampeders is the one for you. Following their statement win against Winnipeg last week, handing the Blue Bombers their first loss of the campaign, Vernon Adams and the Calgary Stampeders will be looking to give the Riders the same fate. 4-0 are coming off of a bye. Boost the league's leading highest scoring offense, tied with Hamilton with 33.8 points per game. Calgary is right behind them though with 29.0 points per contest. It appears that Trevor Harris will return this week, giving Saskatchewan's confidence of having their veteran starting pivot behind center. It should be mentioned through that backup Jake Maier filled in 2 weeks ago and led the Riders to a victory over BC. Both teams have excellent defenses. Calgary's defensive coordinator Bob Slowick has found a way to keep opponents off the score sheet, allowing a league 20.3 points per game so far in 2025. The unit has only surrendered 5 touchdowns, 5 less than the next team in Winnipeg. On the other side, Corey Mace's defense has been able to disrupt opposing quarterbacks with 10 sacks on the season and has kept the ground game in check with just 66.5 yards per game on the ground allowed. We'll see how this chess match shakes out on Friday Night Football. Game 2. Can Ottawa stop Hamilton's aerial attack? Ottawa at Hamilton, Saturday, July 12th, 7 p.m. Eastern on TSN, RDS, CTV, and CFL Plus. Last week we saw what the Ticats were hoping to get from Kenny Lawler after signing him as a free agent this offseason. Lawler hauled in 207 yards and 3 touchdowns in the Ticats' win over the Toronto Argonauts last Friday. The 31-year-old is averaging 120 points per game and a 20.1 yards per catch to go along with 5 touchdowns in over 4 games. Thanks to largely Lawler, who is atop of the CFL in receiving yards, Tiger Cats are averaging passing yards per game 307.5 through the first 5 weeks of the year. Hamilton is also tied with Winnipeg for the most touchdowns through the air, 9. Ottawa will look to slow down that offense attack this weekend at Hamilton Stadium. Ottawa has been able to do a good job containing opposing and passing attacks so far this year, allowing 269.8 yards per game and just 6 touchdowns in the air. But it's big plays that have burned them, allowing the second most completions of over 30 yards in the CFL with 12. Can Ottawa tighten things up and stifle Bo Levi Mitchell and company? Or will Black and Gold put on an air show for their hometown fans at home? We'll have to tune in to find out Saturday night. And the third one is Stop the Run, BC at Edmonton, Sunday, July 13th, 7 p.m. Eastern on TSN, RDS, and CFL Plus. Edmonton won their first game of the 2025 season last week, and there are 2 running backs who were instrumental in that victory, Justin Rankin and Javon Leake. Rankin scored his first major of the season, a 74-yard run, to go along with 174 yards from scrimmage and another touchdown through the air. Leake, who shared the handoffs with Rankin in the backfield, scored on a punt return in the team's victory over Ottawa. Rankin, who scored his first major of the season, 74 yards, to go along with 174 yards from scrimmage and another touchdown in the air. Leake shared his handoffs with Rankin in the backfield, scored on the punt return in Toronto's victory over Ottawa. The duo, along with the dual-threat quarterback Trey Ford and blocking from the offensive line, have helped Edmonton average 117.0 yards per game on the ground, 4th most in the CFL. And now the group is going up against a team that has struggled to stop the run. BC defense give up the most rushing yards per game on an average of 136.4 yards surrendered. Can BC contain the Elks' attack, or will the Edmonton continue to run over their opponents? So next up is going to be the CFL sits and starts. So we are going to look at 3 must-plays and who to avoid in Week 6. Since there's only 3 games, there's only 3 people that will be sitting and starting. So for Calgary at Saskatchewan, Calgary's 3-1 versus Saskatchewan 4-0. They're saying start Jalen Philpott. The success of early season most outstanding player candidate Dedrick Mills has lessened the need for the Stampeders to throw at will. Jalen Philpott has been targeted at least 10 times in the past 2 games and comes in an average of 9.2 fantasy points per contest. But this week, like the week, Vernon Adams will have Philpott get heavily involved. Despite the unsafetied start, the Rough Riders have allowed 302.5 passing yards and 24.8 offensive points per game. This plays ideally with Philpott, who's averaging 18.7 yards per catch and has 3 receptions of over 20 yards deep. Count on Philpott to surpass his season high 8 targets and find a steady flow of production from the outset of the West Class Division. They suggest sitting Dante Myers. This is the 1 week stacking Rough Riders receivers may not prove bountiful. Calgary's success against the pass is a big reason the Stamps are off to a strong start, as they are allowed just 260 passing yards per game and only 1 completion of better than 30 yards. Surprisingly, Saskatchewan is in last with 244 passing yards per game, while the physical running attack led by AJ Ouellette is partly behind the number. The Riders' passing game has yet to fully get on track. Dante Myers' Week 6 average of 11.9 fantasy points per game comes off at a 4.5 fantasy point outing in the Week 4 win over BC. Although a healthy Trevor Harris will help improve Myers' numbers, the foundation of the Riders will continue to give Ouellette a heavy workload in a game expected to be a low-scoring affair, which means Myers is the odd man out. For the Ottawa 1-4 at Hamilton 2-2, they're saying to start Justin Hardy. Red Black fans can rejoice now that Drew Brown has returned to the lineup. That means Justin Hardy's status amongst the top pass catchers in fantasy resumes after 4 games of a below average production. Hardy has had a 10.6 fantasy point in Week 5 fantasy loss to Edmonton, easily his best since opening the season with 27.3 fantasy points. Similar to Week 1, Hardy has had 10 targets in Week 5. With the rust off, he and Brown will aim at a Ticat defense allowing 27.3 offensive points per game. Hamilton has done well in limiting big plays, 3 completions of plus 30-plus yards, but Ottawa relentless downfield approach and fleet of quality receivers could turn this game into an aerial battle between Bowe and Brown. If stacking Bowe and Hardy together feels good, then all means do so. You'll feel better later Saturday evening. Sit Hamilton defense 7,800. With both teams bringing plenty of offensive power, it makes sense to find your Week 6 defense will not come from Saturday's game. The Ticats defense took a massive fantasy tumble in Week 5, scoring -1 fantasy points a week after surprising everyone with 21 fantasy points. Facing an Ottawa offense at nearly capacity is not an encouraging sign. A rebound for Hamilton, which has, to their credit, been solid against the run. This isn't to suggest Ottawa's defense will go better. Only the Elks 7.65 has allowed more yards per play than the Red Blacks 7.4, whose yield 12 completions of more than 30 yards. BC 2-3 at Edmonton 1-3. Start Justin Rankin. We are due for a breakout from Justin Rankin, and he's sure to deliver in Week 5. Rankin scored 33.4 fantasy points, easily leading all running backs as he accounted for 174 yards and 2 majors from scrimmage in the Elks win over the Red Blacks. It won't be easy to top that performance, but Rankin now faces a Lions run defense that has allowed the league's worst 134 yards rushing per game. Rankin has 11 runs of at least 10 yards, 3 of the 20-plus variety, and will make things easier for pivot Trey Ford as he throws against the league's stringest defense pass. He will continue to be presence as a receiver, 11.2 yards per catch on 13 receptions. Making Rankin an excellent anchor to build your Week 6 lineup around. Curly Gittens Jr. Now that Rankin has grooved back, perhaps it's Curly Gittens Jr.'s turn to establish his fantasy bona fides. The national pass catcher scored his second major of 2025 in a win over Ottawa, but finished with only 24 yards on 3 catches. Gittens Jr. has only 10 catches for 126 yards. 95 of those come in Week 5. Outside of Stephen Dunbar Jr., the Elks receiving for Archie is jumbled. Opportunity awaits for Gittens Jr. to help bring stability to Edmonton's pass attack, but this is not the week if he or anyone in green and gold will solve that puzzle. Now we are going to look at the top outstanding Canadian Watch 6 top contenders in Week 6. So first one is Trey Ford and Nathan Rourke, quarterback, Edmonton Elks and BC Lions. It's okay to bail out the fence. Sit here. Trey Ford and Nathan Rourke are both great, and it's worth noting based on the position that both are likely to be the leading candidates by season end. However, there can only be one pivot chosen, and I didn't want to pass the chance to acknowledge Kevin Mattel's greatness early this season as well. More on him later. Ford is taking far more sacks, but his completion percentage has greatly improved after a highly efficient game against Ottawa in Week 5. They have the same interception to touchdown numbers and are similar across the number of quarterback analyst numbers, as they are both coming off wins heading into this weekend. For once, let's lay down the sword and applaud how rare it is to see two Canadian quarterbacks in the top 5 of league passing. There's another round of top flight performances in Week 6. Next one is Cameron Judge. Cameron Judge is leading in a league of his own when it comes to Canadian defensive performers right now, especially at linebacker. While Stavros Katratonis continues to be an impact for the Hamilton at free safety, and Ben Haletic is a standout for the BC Lions in the middle, it's Judge who claims of only Canadian in the top 5 of total defensive plays to this point in the CFL season. While recent resumes of getting gashed by Levi Mitchell in the Hamilton Ticat offense, Week 5 leaves a sour taste that had much more to do with the Argo secondary and Kenny Lawler going bananas than a poor Judge performance. He's impossible to not continue to mention in this bye-week list with the current standard play. Number 3, Sean Thomas Erlington, running back, Montreal Alouettes. In the first outstanding Canadian watch of the season, I put Sean Thomas Erlington in with the caveat that he won't be able to keep pace with his fun and fast start of the season. While he's refusing to go away, while the production isn't at a Brady Oliveira or John Cornish level, Sean is still averaging 5.2 yards per carry and running hard. This has honestly become more than just an eye test for me than the hard numbers, but both are serving as solid arguments for his presence. Winnipeg's Matthew Peterson has put up impressive efforts this season as well, but will lose the ground to Brady Oliveira's return, as Brady plays catch-up on a significant time missed to short the campaign. Number 4, Justin McInnis, receiver, BC Lions. Just 24 yards up the road from Kevin Mattal, with 1 fewer catch and 7 more targets, is BC Lions, who is the only CFL receiver in the top 10 of receiving to have a game of 9 catches. The real reason McInnis being here is that he's done it all with just one explosive play of 30 yards or more. And you know that explosive play, or that explosion, is just waiting to happen. At the end of the year, and quarterback Nathan Rourke seemed to struggle at times to get on the same page, but this season is much more connected and arithmetic. And then, lastly, is Kevin Mattal. My gut says this to me, just obviously loving the high completion percentage receiver, because they are the most quarterback-friendly thing on the planet. But the reality is Kevin Mattal has played his way into this discussion in the receiving group that also features Deshaun Brissett and David Unger III. Mattal's 27 catches leads the CFL in doing it on 29 targets for 93.1% completion rate. It is absurd, even if most of the scripted plays get him more open flying to the flats or on the shadow crossing route. So that is this week's fantasy preview. Sunday evening I will come out and do a review of all the numbers for Game Zone Fantasy. Don't forget, this week we'll also have Friday we will have the Ticats Red Blacks preview. I will do that Friday morning, have it out in the afternoon, while on Friday, once the depth charts are sent out. This is Rick from Hamilton Sports Central, and have yourself a great rest of your day.